Well, welcome everybody. Very pleased to have you all here with us today. I'm David Kirkpatrick, the founder of Techonomy. I'm joined with here today by Dan Costa, who is my colleague and the editorial director of Worth and deeply involved with Techonomy as well, which has been a huge pleasure in the last few months. What we're doing today is part of sort of the build up to our Health and Wealth of Our Planet conference, which takes place on Tuesday, September 20th here in New York, which is a joint event sponsored by both Worth, which Dan runs, and Techonomy, which I run, and focused very much on sustainability and business and climate action. And with the presumption that companies that don't really act actively to be making the climate better don't deserve even to exist. We're quite firm on that. We've got a spectacularly good program, which was really improved even further last week when Eileen Fisher agreed to speak. And then we were very lucky that the next day, the New York Times published a huge profile about what a pioneer she was in sustainability. So that's a great thing. We're opening with the president of the Club of Rome. They introduced a report 50 years ago called The Limits to Growth. They're now reassessing how bad it is that the world did not take the message 50 years ago. And we continue to grow headlong into a disastrous scenario that we now find ourselves in. We'll close with Seth Godin, who has recently published a book called The Carbon Almanac, which he produced by a very innovative collaborative means and is all about reducing all of our carbon footprint corporately, individually, societally, etc. But what we're here today to discuss is Web3 and is it sustainable, which is a deliberately provocative idea in that, in my opinion, what we're here going to discuss is sustainability, both in the sense of the idea itself and whether or not Web3 is a contributor towards societal and global sustainability in the sense of contributing to or diminishing global warming. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to turn the stage over to Dan, who is really in some ways more of an expert in this area than I am, although my opinions may turn out to be slightly stronger than his, which would at least make it an interesting conversation. But Dan, why don't you lay out what is Web3? And when you hear the question, is it sustainable? What does that make you think about?
Yeah, I think probably the place to start is this term Web3 is being bandied about, which sort of comes with the presumptive notion that there was a Web 1 and a Web 2.0. Just to review those two, the Web 1.0 was really considered to be like the first generation of the web, really predating mobile phones, which is how most people experience the internet today. It was mostly text-based. It had some photos, but it was pretty one directional. You would publish to the web, people would consume it from there. The rise of social media and mobile devices really brought us Web 2.0 in the 2000s. That's where we saw social media and really the consumers of the web actually were contributing their information. In a lot of ways, consumers became the product on the web. So the user contribution part of Web 2.0 was great. One of the downsides of Web 2.0 is that power and control really started to consolidate in a few companies. Facebook, Google, Amazon really dominate this era and really control a lot of how the platform works, which has caused a lot of discontent, and we've covered it a lot on Techonomy over the years. So then we're getting to this point where we are on the point where we could be getting onto the third generation of the web, Web 3.0, and it's basically used as a catch-all for everything that's coming next. There are no real hard and fast definitions of what is Web 3.0, what is not Web 3.0. But I think the key concept of this next generation of web, which is not fully built yet, which is still being conceived, but the early pioneers are starting to build the building blocks, is that this next generation of web will be decentralized. There won't be the gatekeepers that we have today. It'll be the governance will be decentralized. The property rights will be decentralized, and that decentralization will be the key founding factor of this next generation of web. And then that decentralization really brings up the point of cryptocurrencies and the blockchain, because the blockchain is really what's going to enable a lot of those decentralized applications. In a lot of ways, Bitcoin is one of the first Web 3.0 applications that's out there, because it's decentralized in a way that we're basically trying to take that model and apply it to a variety of other different web applications. So Web 3.0 isn't completely reliant on the blockchain, but blockchain is an enabling technology of Web 3.0 applications.
Wait, is that all you're going to say? Okay.
So, I think that sort of sets the stage.
Keep going. Yeah, keep going.
I think that sort of sets the stage. And then we get to we can talk about Web 3.0. We can talk about AI. The metaverse is often referenced interchangeably with Web 3.0. But I think when we talk about sustainability, the clearest lines in terms of, and the biggest questions about the sustainability of Web 3.0 is the sustainability of blockchain applications and cryptocurrencies. As you know, Bitcoin itself requires a huge amount of power to perform its calculations, always has, and that's sort of built into the technology. Bitcoin itself is not a particularly sustainable technology. A lot of Web 3.0 applications are built using Ethereum, which is an alternative cryptocurrency, which is basically also includes the ability to have smart contracts. One of the best examples of a decentralized smart contracting system, and a lot of Web 3.0 applications are built using Ethereum. Right now, Ethereum requires the same proof of work that Bitcoin does, and as a result uses massive amounts of power. And this is how it's been built. The interesting thing about Ethereum is that they are, developers understand this is a problem, and this is going to prevent Ethereum from really scaling and being the platform of choice for Web 3.0 applications. So coming up, this has been in the works for years, but coming up in just a few weeks on September 15th or 16th, Ethereum is going to fork, and they are going to move to a proof of stake system in terms of validating their blockchain. And that will remove a huge amount of power usage. Really, 99% of all of the carbon footprint of Ethereum is going to be removed by this transition. It's a very complex process. There may be hiccups to it along the way, but that migration is coming in just a few weeks, and I think couldn't come soon enough, because if you look at the carbon footprint of crypto right now, Bitcoin uses more power than the entire country of Norway. It's a massive power drain, and comes with all sorts of unfortunate externalities. There are coal plants that are operating, and natural gas plants that are operating in the United States, pretty much for the sole purpose of mining Bitcoin. This is not where we want to be as a society, as a country. And I think it's a great step forward to see Ethereum, if they can pull off this fork, moving to a proof of stake system that'll just remove this unfortunate consequence of the cryptocurrency platform.
Great. Well, as the audience can tell, you're a very measured, methodical thinker, which I welcome and I need, because I tend to be a little more heated in my analysis of things, which I hope to demonstrate momentarily. Already we're getting questions, and I do want to say we will go to audience questions and comments, and we don't have to just be questions. You can raise your hand or put something into the chat, as who did that? Sandhu just did that. Good for you, Sandhu. But we're not going to get to that quite yet, because I'm going to make a few sort of general incendiary, I hope, remarks. And the reason I wanted to do this session, and I was really happy Dan was also strongly in favor, is that this idea of Web3 is pretty much presumptively bandied about in tech as if it were the de facto next thing. And when I look at that, and I also think about our priorities as techonomy and as a society and my own personal priorities, The next thing has to be sustainable and has to reduce our carbon footprint and our emissions, or the world is screwed. The world is in a disastrous place when it comes to climate change and weather, worsening, and all these things that we know very much, which we discussed more about last week on the session we had on carbon accounting. But my feeling is, if Web3 is going to be the next thing, it damn well better help us make the change we need, which is to save the planet effectively. So I object to Web3 on that basis on two fundamental grounds. Well, maybe more than two, but at least two. Dan is really, I think, well described the carbon issues surrounding crypto, which is really, let's say there's two big parts of what is generally said to be Web3. That's cryptocurrencies and the blockchain on the one hand, and the metaverse on the other, and they're very closely tied because many people believe that much of the operational underpinnings of the metaverse will be based one way or another on blockchain-based systems, although how exactly is really never fully articulated. Yeah, Rick, we'll get to that. Oh, okay, how is metaverse decentralized, Rick is asking? It won't be unless it is controlled by blockchains, but then again, actually, Dan, jump in on that.
Yeah, I'll say, so there isn't like one metaverse at the moment, and there may never be one singular metaverse. Right now, metaverse applications are being experimented with. They are launching. They tend to be, they tend to be pretty platform specific. They are not terribly decentralized. If you make virtual purchases in Meta Horizons, you can't take those purchases to other metaverses and have them adorn your avatar there. So at this stage, they are not decentralized. But there is a hope and a promise that we will get to the point where there will be standards, and these don't exist yet, that in this new generation of Web3 metaverse applications, that you will be able to, your identity won't be managed through Google or through Twitter or through Facebook. You will be able to have a digital identity that you control. You'll be able to manage your privacy settings across the entire metaverse. All of these things are hopeful plans, and there's work being done, there's development being done on them, but none of them exist right now. And right now, the metaverse experiments that are out there tend to be very proprietary. They're walled gardens, which will allow them to move very quickly, but it certainly doesn't fulfill the promise of Web 3.0 or having a truly decentralized system.
Well, even before I get to my fundamental objection to the metaverse as it's being described, it's worth noting that Matthew Ball, who's sort of become the de facto lead spokesperson for the metaverse, when he talks about the metaverse that he sees as likely, possibly even highly advantageous, he presumes it is an interoperable, open metaverse, not dissimilar to the openness and interoperability of the web, not controlled by any one company, that it effectively becomes the next internet. That's the way he believes it needs to go. And of course, the fact that Facebook changed its name to Meta muddies that water very tremendously, and it's, I think, a really probably tragic development of recent period. One of many tragedies that's emanated from Facebook is that at the moment when they were most getting heat from the revelations of Frances Haugen about all the terrible things they've done over many, many years, they decided that was the moment to change their name, change the narrative, say that they don't really care as much about that stuff anymore because they're going somewhere new, which is the metaverse. Now, I think Zuckerberg really does believe that the metaverse is the future, but I don't think that that's why they changed the name when they did. They changed the name when they did in order to change the narrative. And unfortunately, that was extremely successful and reinforced a consensus view that seems to have sort of infected the entire tech industry that yes, the metaverse was imminent. Because if Facebook changed their name, that must mean it's looming. It is not looming. If it happens, it is very, very far off, first of all. But let me backtrack slightly, since Dan has touched on the crypto side a little, and I'll go back to that maybe later. But the main problem I have with the idea that the metaverse is the future of consumer digital communication and experience, which is basically what Zuckerberg believes, is that if we are at a point in time when the world needs our attention more desperately than ever, the last thing we need is a digital future that withdraws us from the actual world. And I consider that a fundamentally irresponsible thing to advocate, despite the fact that I do believe the metaverse as a concept has a lot of appeal for a lot of different kinds of things. Oddly and ironically, many of them industrial, actually. Collaborative industrial and business activities could really be advantaged by metaverse capabilities, shall we say. But we do not want to withdraw from the world and just be like those. I mean, I always think of Wall-E and those fat people slipping their Slurpees in space, watching TV all the time. That's the world that I envision Zuckerberg is effectively trying to suck us into through his relentless advocacy of the metaverse, which of course, Meta, the company, wants to dominate. And that's why they've changed their name. They think they will be the de facto. But of course, then let's remember, their vision of the metaverse is really diametrically opposite of that of Matthew Ball's, because it is not truly interoperable, whatever words they might mouth about that. But let me just quickly touch on the crypto piece as in my cynical rebuttal or response, because this is, we really do want to hear from you, and I'm really glad a lot of people are weighing in already, and we're going to let some of you even speak if you'd like to or whatever. As I was prepping for this, I realized that, in my opinion, crypto, as exemplified by Bitcoin, is the digital equivalent of QAnon. And when I say that, it's because even though I don't think we can assume by any means that the inventors of crypto in the form of Satoshi Nakamoto, who is a person or persons that brilliantly invented Bitcoin, I don't think they necessarily were exponents of what has become the consensus view, but the consensus view of the majority of the crypto community, in my opinion, is anti-institutional, libertarian, and essentially nihilistic. And that's very similar to QAnon, that what we have now is so bad, we should just destroy it, whether or not we have something new to replace it. And that is really the aim of people who believe cryptocurrency should replace all quote unquote fiat currencies, etc. Now, there are plenty of other sub-views within the crypto community. I recognize and I acknowledge, and I do think the Ethereum community is fundamentally founded on a different set of notions that in many ways is deeply positive. And I'm quite familiar in particular with, say, the Polkadot community. We've had the CEO of the company that built Polkadot at our program speaking twice. They really believe that crypto could be the foundation for a safer, more, individually controlled internet. That's very cool. But we do not want to destroy everything we have in order to create the new. We have to build on what we have in order to create the new. So from the standpoint of building a secure, sustainable future, I don't think the Bitcoin community, even aside from an energy irresponsibility that it is founded upon, really believes in the kind of progress that I believe in. So my strong opinions have been expressed. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair point, and I think but we have to separate out Bitcoin as a speculative financial product that people are trading in as an investment. They want to make money. That's what Bitcoin was designed to do, and that's how that market operates. Blockchain technology, and Ethereum is a great example of it, is a lot more robust, has a lot more features, and really does provide this underlying contractual system that can support a lot of these next generation apps. And particularly in terms of protecting people's, managing their own identities, in managing their private information. Right now, what's happened with Web 2.0 is that, pretty much anytime you go onto the web, you're being tracked. Your data is being shared with private companies, and you really don't have a lot of control over that if you want to participate in the modern world. The thing that Web 3.0 could provide, and this needs to be built, like these are technologies and solutions and applications that do not really exist yet, but it could provide a lot of those protections and really provide a lot more privacy features. And what you're seeing now are a lot of experiments, a lot of products launching, a lot of noise around the metaverse. But developers are working on building these solutions too, and are at least trying to do so in a way that's more sustainable by moving to this proof of stake system. And Ethereum's not the only blockchain that's moving to proof of stake. There are several out there already that are being used. So I think and there's growing consensus that that is the future, and that the old school proof of work, running giant server farms in order to generate digital currency, is just not the way to go. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of these power plants that are operating in the United States. There's one in upstate New York that was actually offline for, I think, 7 years before it was bought by investors. And now 85% of all the power it generates goes strictly to mining Bitcoin. It's just a giant server farm in a natural gas factory. And that, I think we can all agree, is certainly not sustainable and not where we want to put our energies.
Thank you, Dan. I've said in the chat that people should raise their hands using the raise hand feature if you want to come on audio. And without even asking Tony O'Driscoll, who I know well, I've made your audio possible so that you could express your question verbally rather than me try, because I didn't fully understand it anyway, Tony. So tell us, who you are and what was your comment.
Oh, sorry. I think I actually hit the raise hand by accident. So, but yeah. So
what I'm asking for. So go ahead.
So I've been kind of tracking Balaji Srinivasan, who's obviously on the kind of Bitcoin currency world, the notion of a network state, that nation states are kind of all messed up and they're all polarized, and let's just forget that and let's move to a network state, and we can build that on a DeFi environment, et cetera, et cetera. So then that drew me back to David, Scott Malcolmson, who kind of said, well, the internet itself and the World Wide Web is becoming a splinter net because different regimes want different control over data, whether that's companies in America wanting control over data or China wanting surveillance capitalism, so on and so forth. I guess if you look at both of those, my concern is if we just 3D-ize the current kind of feudalism model where we're kind of producing data that gets monetized elsewhere through either for surveillance through a government or for capital gain through a company, I'm with David on that. I think we're all screwed. So on the one side, there's this notion of decentralization, and that's all cool, and I can prove ownership. Don Tapscott talks a whole lot about this, that in that world, you could say there's an immutable record that says this land or this asset is mine, fine. But at the same time, whether we go from proof of work to proof of stake, if the model is the same, are we not just in a deep shit show either way? Like it's just we're doing it in 3 dimensions now faster rather than not. So I'm kind of like, it seems to me beyond just decentralization and the having the capability to do that in a 3D world, we almost need a completely different framing of how we're going to work and live. So it's an ill-formed question, I think.
That's really helpful, Tony. And you didn't say so, but I should tell the crowd that you teach at Duke and you've been involved with Techonomy for many years. And you're a really smart guy, obviously. And happily, Scott is a big part of our community too. And too bad he's not here. But, I wanted to just mention on this governance question, which you touch on, and I was going to challenge Dan on this, but I'm just going to say it and he can answer if he wants. But I want to get other people in. John Madison, we're going to get you because your hand's up. Okay, lots of good people with their hands up, including Dan Lewin, who I'm very eager to hear. And Rick, I'd love to put you on audio at some point too. But my feeling about Meta having changed its name and saying this is our future, it is doubly or triply or quadruply tragic. because of this, because they have so egregiously failed at governance in their existing structure. And the governance challenges will be so much greater in the metaverse, where all kinds of legal and behavioral pathologies are likely to emerge, that the possibility that this company that has so consistently failed to effectively govern a text-based system and text and photo-based system and a little bit of video could conceivably effectively govern a metaverse, it's ludicrous, just utterly ludicrous and criminally ludicrous almost. And I do think Facebook Meta is bordering on a criminal organization at this point in time, based on many of the impacts that it's had on society. But anyway, okay, now I'm scaring off some of those hands. I didn't mean to do that, but I don't know who Carrie is, but she's at the top of the list to talk at the moment. Oh, John Madison, you're back. You were there first. I'm going to let you talk if I can see you. Yeah, there you go. Okay, John, say whatever you're going to say and identify yourself, please.
Yeah, John Madison, spent most of my career in healthcare and now in private equity. In terms of the sort of underpinning of Web 3.0 around creators being able to own and manage their own data and how they monetize it, the notion of self-sovereign identity is sort of central in that construct. And while I am a big supporter of self-sovereign identity, the challenges that I see, and I haven't heard great solutions for, to have a distributed autonomous organization managing those self-sovereign identities in any form, is that once you issue the identity, there is a risk of identity theft. And because the aggregation of everything into a single self-sovereign identity becomes so profound, identity theft becomes much more of a threat to the existence of an individual in the social and economic spheres. So how do we create the physical digital interface between the issuance of identity, the quarantining of that identity when it is stolen, the repair of the damage done during that hijacking of that identity, and then reissuing the identity? How do we think about those digital physical interfaces in a way that supports a very desirable feature of Web 3.0 in a practical way that doesn't resort to centralized authorities?
Dan, why don't you say?
Yes, I mean, you've identified the problem pretty clearly. Like there's a reason why we use these centralized authorities, is because once you put your trust in them, which a lot of us are doing involuntarily right now, there's a traffic cop that can police this. The structures that are being put in place now, the DAOs that are being formed, they're trying to accomplish that. They're trying to provide some measure of control, some measure of error correction, but keeping it distributed and allowing the distributed network to actually self-regulate. But it really comes down to how that DAO is set up, what the government system is, how it's set up. A lot of the DAOs that are out there now, if you dig down into it, there's really just a handful of people controlling the system and making all of the decisions. So there's a lot of idealism in how Web 3.0 could take shape, but I think you're right that the solutions are not built yet, and to the extent that actually I would actually send people. Tim Berners-Lee spoke at Techonomy last year, right, David, or the year before?
I think it was 2018, actually.
2018. The video is, you can find the video on YouTube. He's been dedicating himself to this particular problem for a long, long time. He's a very smart guy, and he is making progress on privacy vaults that will allow you to carry your information and authenticate you. But even he hasn't worked it out completely yet. So this is a challenge we're gonna have to try and meet.
Well, Tim is a great technologist, but not a very good marketer. And I'm worried that his innovations, smart as they are and well motivated as they are, haven't really made much difference and may not be likely to. One of the things that amazes me, and I want any of you, we're not trying to, like, these hands keep going up and down, it confuses me, but I think it's interesting, the nature of the dialogue and the comments, even in text that many of you are just sending to us as the panelists. It's almost universally in this group, pretty skeptical and negative about this Web3 stuff, which is interesting to me and not necessarily what I would have assumed, because the meme that is more prevailing in the media and in the tech industry is that this is the direction, and it is not usually qualified very much as, but it might not be the right thing to happen anyway. It sort of reminds me of the way the New York Times writes about climate, where they write about all these horrible weather things, and then they have a paragraph sort of in the 5th or 6th paragraph where they say, the beginning of the paragraph, it's impossible to say that any given weather event is actually caused by global warming. However, the evidence suggests that blah, blah, whereas I always think they should flip it. The evidence suggests that global warming is the cause of this weather, even though it may not be possible. And this is the same thing we face with the metaverse and crypto, that people always sort of suppress the skeptical on the side of presuming most likely the good stuff's going to happen, which is just me wrong and in reverse. And I don't know who Carrie is, but I'm going to let you say something. And please identify yourself. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I'm sorry. My name is Carrie. I'm retired, but I'm heading into becoming an educator for how to view the media. And I've been monitoring or going to webinars, young people, and there was one specifically I thought might be pertinent to your discussion today. And they were very interested in blockchain and looking forward to how it could be used for local cryptocurrencies. Many of them are building sites or platforms all over the world. They choose different countries, but they're paid from a currency that may be American currency or Australian. And where they live out in the boonies, relatively, they rely on trust. So they're interested in using cryptocurrencies as a way to bank without being hampered by the banking system where they have to pay services. They had a speaker come who was a specialist in smart contracts. And he made it very clear that right now, as Dan said, that it's willy-nilly. It's just an experiment. But they were looking at it, for instance, there was a woman who was trying to teach women from a Caribbean roots in England how to create blockchain, to create a currency, so they could start to build some kind of a financial basis, because in the local banks, they were excluded. So that's how they were looking at it. However, I'm more from your school, David, and that I think that ethics has to be built in. I think you're looking at sustainability as a part of ethics, and environmental ethics, but I'm looking for how I referred to the Center for Humane Technology through Tristan Harris and his colleague, Randy Fernando. I'm looking to what they're trying to do to teach designers. They had a job posted and they wanted someone with UX design background. And I checked in Canada, U of T or Toronto offers it, but I noticed that you have to go to New York. So it seems that the level of design for interface that could be ethically, yes, you can take a course with the Center for Humane Technology, but seems to be there's barriers. If I'm Canadian, I'm a student, for me to take that course would be difficult. And also through that, so the United States has a kind of monopoly on that right now. That's why I'm listening to you right now. You guys are on the cutting edge of the reality of what's happening. But I do believe that design and ethics have to be homegrown.
Right.
Well, and I'll stop right there. Okay.
You know, just building ethics into a governance system is a pretty
Unknown caller.
task. Okay, what's that? Building ethics. Kendall, can you figure out who that is and shut them up?
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Building ethics into governance is super tough. Look at how the Constitutional Convention and the founders and how they wrestled with it for an awful long time before we got pretty decent document in the founding of this country. I want to ask Dan Lewin to say something. He's got his hand up. He's another longtime tech economist who is the president of the Computer History Museum. So we're really happy you're here, Daniel, and tell us what you got on your mind.
Okay. Yeah, one of the earlier comments, thanks, David, for teeing up the conversation. Historically, there's been a fair amount of work that's pointed to the fact that markets tend to trump hierarchies over time, which is a good indicator of this notion of 1.0 web and 2.0 web, but also that the fact that things that can be used at scale inevitably can be weaponized. And that's what happened with the web, and that's what happened with 2.0, quote unquote, with the consolidation of economics, because obviously internet protocol trumps nation state borders. And so this argument that was reduced a little bit ago to one of the comments that was made about the control and of the identity system is the challenge, because identity and rights management come from nation states, right? And so the argument about sort of cryptocurrencies and trust in monetary systems versus the individual use right of a blockchain based system, there's a lot of tension in those two that I'm not sure that that this notion of 3.0 will exist without intermediaries who are granting a hierarchical trust, even though there will be these discrete marketplaces that will have control and people will opt into them, like the Bitcoin community that thinks there's value in that system architecture, which we know is a kind of a fool's errand from the sustainability argument. By all accounts, my general understanding is that about 2% of the energy in the world is used for hyperscale computing at the moment. And about half of that is used for Bitcoin. It's insane. And yet lots of people are getting rich and a lot of people are getting duped.
What do you mean by hyperscale computing? Just define that.
Cloud-based, consolidated in the manageable number of nation states and nation state actors. And I would consider the top tech firms nation state actors, because they are the new nation states in terms of controlling the economy and the flow of trust and digital, in this case, product, which is people opting into that fool's errand of this is really free. It's not free, right? You're getting a fair amount to get.
You spent most of your career inside one of those nation states, Microsoft, and heading a lot of their public policy and engagement with the world stuff. But I'm curious from your perspective, from that experience and now as a sort of external high-level observer, when you discuss the problems you're articulating and many others that have been mentioned here, how serious is it, in your opinion, that governments, without exception, are essentially, almost without exception, uninvolved in any of this transition, with the exception of talking about creating national digital currencies, which is just one little subset kind of thing? How badly do we need governments to actually understand this transition to quote unquote Web3 if it really were to happen?
I think it's pretty important, and I'll just correct the one thing you said. I was not involved in the policy. I was involved in talking with a lot of political actors and things like that, but there are other people who were doing that work at Microsoft, for sure, much more skilled than I in the field. I just played one on TV. But realistically, I do think that there's no question that the nation states, sovereign states, we've created this structure through the limited liability corporations going back to the very beginning of the world as we know it, the sort of the political economy that exists. I think the wisdom that we don't have at the right level in most societies is the problem, because I do think there needs to be oversight and responsibility that's considered at a national level, because that's, you can say that you're going to control your own identity in this virtual web 3.0 thing where you can move your thing around, but where did you get your identity in the first place? And by what rules and regulations are you governed in terms of your action as a political actor? You're a human being, and politics is relationships between or among people, whether they're individuals or scale to hierarchies. So where did you get your identity, and how are you going to transfer that trust? If it's economic or just some object that's ephemeral, if it's physical goods, then it boils down to physical proximity, like markets and bazaars where people are let in based upon proximity, and then they trade. I've got eggs, you've got cheese, there's value. That's where money comes from. And then how do you abstract that when you go digital, where it's real time, the speed of light, cross nation state borders? I just think that we live in a system that is, so fundamentally governed by, your individual identity being commissioned by a nation state. So they have to be actors. That's my 2 cents.
But they're so generally, I mean, with the possible exception, growing exception of the EU and the European Commission, in general, governments still seem not close enough to the forefront to really.
Oh, I'm fully agreeing with you that that's the reality. I mean, Kennedy had, right, what was his name? Wiesner from MIT as a science advisor. It's like, when's the last time we had that kind of partnership? And what did we end up with then? Well, we realized we had an existential threat, quote unquote. The Russians had better rockets, so they fed Silicon Valley to reduce the weight on the payload, right? So that's the last time those things really got championed at the level that it's required. It's, again, personal opinion, and that's where other societies, like them or not, take Singapore or smaller nation states that have actually invested in the IQ that's required to govern at that level.
I'm going to go to Robin now because she's got her hand up, Robin Kim. But interestingly, I happen to be working a little bit with some Ukrainian government people on some very hypothetical long-term thinking. And the Ukrainian government views the opportunity that they will have in the post-war period as uniquely open. And they are really trying to envision how will they be able to build a digital society that is truly modern, well-governed, secure, open and transparent. I'm very, very intrigued by what I've learned about some of the thinking, and we'll probably have a government official from the Ukraine at our Techonomy 2022 conference in Sonoma, November 13th through 15th, for what it's worth. But thank you so much, Daniel, for what you said. And Robin, go ahead.
No, hi, David, Dan, and just really enjoying the discussion. I'm Robin Kim. I'm a storyteller, longtime Techonomy fan. I'm with Reuter Finn. And really, this is more of a question, I think, for you and for the group. And there's definitely this full theme that tech has always run ahead of public policy in the real world. And clearly, so much of this discussion is about the exponential problem that this is creating in the Web3 world. I would love to hear, just for governance in that world, which is such a big theme on here, who and what do you think are actually some points of light? I love, Dan, what you were talking about, what Ethereum is doing. I loved what Claire was saying on community-based reframing, the discussion and the actors, ethics and design, at least on a conceptual level, being built in. And would just love to hear the group's thoughts on a little bit more on the what and the who that can at least start to create the beginnings, right, of how we navigate.
Dan, say something on that.
Yeah, I'll say I've got one example because I'm trying to be the optimist on this panel because David certainly has me flanked on the pessimism side. But so there are some interesting applications. So Elon Musk's brother started something called the Big Green Dow with $1 million of his own money. He put it up, and it's a DAO that is designed to fund food charities and fund local community farms. He started with 6 local farm charities. They distributed, I don't know, $50,000 a piece to each one of them, and then all of those farmers and organizations picked the next recipients of funding. Since it started, they've raised $6 million. They've funded dozens and dozens of community farming projects. And it's running, it's built on a DAO that is pretty ethically sound. If that's a model that we can replicate, I think that there could be tremendous upside to these types of organizations. Unfortunately, for every one of those, in the last 6 months, you've seen that a lot of people have made money in crypto, but you've also seen countless scams. And somebody mentioned, like, why are all these crypto sites so insecure? A lot of them are not. It's not that they're insecure, it's that they were built to be scams. They're working exactly the way they were designed to work, which is to fleece people of their money. They're built to be Ponzi schemes, and they attract people who think they're going to get rich quick. But it's fundamental to how they're structured, and it's a misallocation of people's trust when they participate in those types of ventures. So there are a lot more of those scams out there than there are Big Green Dows. But over time, I think that'll start to shake out a little bit, and people will start to sort of educate themselves about what is an ethically sound DAO look like, and how is it structured. A lot of these things are just being worked out now.
Unfortunately, when someone gets rich enough, people think they're smart. So Fortune will put Sam Bankman-Fried on the cover in Current Issue saying he might be the next Warren Buffett, which I find a ludicrous and dangerously scary notion. But, just to quickly address your point, Robin, we at Techonomy have deeply gone into climate action and technology for climate as one of our central efforts and inquiries. And it's interesting because even with our session last week on carbon accounting, if any of you were there, you would have heard our expert from the Columbia Center for Sustainable Investment talking about how many of the projects involving carbon management, blockchain solutions are vetted as a potentially critical tool for these emergent systems. However, in his opinion, he said, there is almost not any example that he's encountered where a simpler database methodology might not be a better solution, even though, yes, you could use a blockchain for a lot of these things. There isn't necessarily a reason to do it. And I must say, as a longtime observer, we did our first article about blockchain and techonomy in, 2015 or something like that. And I'm not an expert, but I'm hard pressed to point to good examples of where great things have happened in the world that could only be achieved with a blockchain solution, with the exception potentially of private blockchains used by logistics infrastructures and some banking systems, which are really just well-secured private databases. So I just don't think that we've seen evidence that the world can really take advantage of what was genuinely a tremendous technological innovation, the blockchain, that Satoshi Nakamoto or whomever that group or person was, really did pioneer a brilliant set of tools. But whether we really need them or not is still, I think, unproven. But I want to just also note Rick Moody, who says he's in a bad space, he can't get audio. He wrote we've glossed over the psychology of the experience of the metaverse, which is the part that really concerns him. And I don't know, your thoughts on that, Dan. What do you think, Dan, about this idea that the metaverse invites us to withdraw from the actual world, which is dangerous?
I'll say, I think that we've got to be careful that, not to be afraid of the new. The argument strikes me similar to what people said when, when I was a kid, I was watching too much TV and my mom said you should get out and play more. My son plays games too much, and I think that that's causing him to be antisocial. Kids today are on their phones too much. The truth of the matter is, these technologies are not, I don't think they're necessarily any more isolating. All of us are talking on a video call right now, which is something that we would not have been able to do 20 years ago. So I think, we shouldn't resist them just because they're new. I think, there are some really incredible social aspects to interacting in the multiverse, in the metaverse. And I think a lot of the younger generation are actually living in a metaverse right now. They come home from school, they log on, they play World of Warcraft, they play, they have these mediated digital existences that are persistent, where they form real relationships with their peers and this is just a different way of socializing. So I'm not, I don't fear the sort of isolation of the metaverse, especially, I think you could make a different argument about VR headsets, which I think are pretty isolating. But I think the promise of the metaverse is that this will just be another way of interacting with people in a way that's richer and more, dare I say, multimedia than the text interactions and the sort of purely screen-based interactions that we have today via our computer screens.
Okay, two things I wanted to say. One is we do have to acknowledge that to some extent a metaverse-like experience is already being had by tens of millions of gamers. We haven't even used the word game until now. We really should, because there's an awful lot of stuff happening that is very metaverse-like in the gaming community, and those people have a great time doing it. But you might, in China, and in Korea, they consider them so sufficiently addicted that the Chinese government has banned children under a certain age from even spending more than a few hours a week in these games. And Korea has all these famous systems to, deprogram the addiction of people who are gamers, et cetera. So look, people are already proving the risks of immersion in a digital environment in that context. I want to just say one other objection I have to the notion that the metaverse is the future of tech. And that is something that Americans are so bad at, taking a global view. The internet is predominantly people in poor countries using very inexpensive phones, many of them not even smartphones, but even if they are smartphones, inexpensive, generally at relatively low bandwidth. All of the things we talk about and that Zuckerberg is so excited about require expensive devices and high bandwidth. But the likelihood that billions of people to be the de facto consumer experience of the users of the internet globally will be a system that requires that kind of bandwidth and endpoint technology in the near term is nil. There is no chance of that. There is no likelihood.
See, I'd push back on that, and I'd say, I've already been accused of drinking the Kool-Aid once in the comment section. But I mean, the thing is, the future's already here. It's just unevenly distributed, right? Like, we know the direction that these technologies are going in. We've seen our data speeds go from dial-up to broadband in 20 years. The question is, in another 20 years, we don't imagine that it's going to get any slower. It's going to accelerate. Bandwidth will improve. The technology costs of smartphones will decline. So I think that it's fair to say that, like, we can chart out some of the directions that this is heading in, and I don't think it's inconceivable to think that there will be, especially look at how many gamers are online now every night. I think that if you look at the direction the technologies are heading in, it's very logical to say we're going to spend more of our time in metaverse applications in the future. I think it's just a question of time frame, of like, how quickly is this type of interoperable digital online world going to be built out? And I think, it's dependent on the standards to make everything work. And that's, you're talking at least 10 years. You're talking a decade before the metaverse that Matthew Ball is promising actually starts to take shape. And until then, we're going to be left with, meta horizons, little virtual avatars. We're going to be left with Fortnite games that allow you to do some in-app purchases and maintain your identity. And then we're going to be going through this sort of walled garden phase. The question is, do we ever get past that? Or are we all just going to go from having our Facebook feeds updated and controlled by Facebook to having our Meta Horizon social interactions controlled by Meta? And I think that's very much an open question that is one of the things why we're trying to direct the evolution of our of this technology, because it as a lot of people on the call have indicated, like, this could go very badly, and it's not necessarily going great right now.
Yeah, and I should say, even when I was saying the thing about Satoshi Nakamoto inventing blockchain, I realized that really wasn't quite accurate. And Mark Seiden says in the comments, he didn't say this to everyone, so I'm going to read it. Arguably, the blockchain was invented by Stuart Haber and Scott Stornetta at Belcore, at least hash and sign on Merkle trees, whatever that means. Sorry, I don't know all that. They got the patent on it and started surety to digitally notarize documents. So credit due there. My apologies for the error I made in that. And interestingly, Carrie's talking about Kate Crawford and AI. We didn't even talk about AI here, which is, implicitly assumed to be part of whatever Web3 turns into. And AI is the whole set of discussions in its own right that we really can't address in the remaining 2 minutes.
That would be biting off just a bit more than we could chew.
I would like to invite anyone in the audience who would like to make a just very short closing exhortation, comment, criticism. Put your hand up now or forever hold your peace. I think I'm surprised by how this discussion has gone and that my cynicism was not pushed back upon more, because it often is pushed back upon when I speak this way in the technology precincts that I spend a lot of time in. And it's actually sometimes sort of amusedly ridiculed. And there are, well, I think legitimate rebuttals to me. People would talk about things like decentralized finance, and there is money actually flowing in some actual financial stuff that is actually useful to the world, I suppose, in DeFi. But there's just so many unresolved, idiotically problematic elements to the so-called transition to Web3 that are not surfaced frequently enough. So I'm really glad that they have been here, and I'm glad the audience seems to more or less be.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. We are going to be doing more of these, and we'll no doubt tweak the format. I think maybe we'll do our next one in the metaverse, in Meta Horizons.
I don't know if John's hand is up again because he wants to say something else, but
yeah, no, I was going to respond to your invitation
Please.
to sort of some closing comments. Roy Amara famously said that futurists tend to overestimate the impact of a new technology in the near term and underestimate it in the long term. I agree, David, with all of your comments about the near-term impact. I agree with Dan on the long-term impact. And specifically, if you look at it from first principles of human cognition, what we get from watching a flat screen TV or screen, what we get from reading text is a very low bandwidth experience. What you get in the metaverse is very high bandwidth with sensory integration. That sensory integration is going to increase. And the dilemma getting from current machine learning to true generalized AI has to do with not the cellular architecture of machine learning, but the anatomic architecture in the brain. And what we need to mimic is the ability to process multi-sensory inputs, each of which is optimized for that sensory data substrate. And what the metaverse is going to allow us to do is to mimic more of the natural operation of the brain, where we do synesthetic integration across various senses. And to the extent that that leads to accelerated learning, accelerated training, accelerating upskilling, I think it's easy to underestimate the long-term impact of the metaverse.
Okay, but when you talk about sustainability, the human imagination is a very important thing. And if we replace the need to have imagination with digital tools, I worry about that. And there's a whole thread that we could go down on a separate session. Even self-driving cars are causing people to lose their spatial capabilities, etc., or even GPS provably already doing so. I think we need to think about the sustainability implications of all this in terms of what we really value in human society and human experience. I am able to get an enormously beneficial experience by reading text on the pages of a physical book. I don't need that to be a metaverse alternative experience in order to have a deeply meaningful, imaginative, and transformational even experience. So another little minor. quick-
I would agree that's a both and, not an either or.
Well, good. And I know you're a doctor, so you've got all kinds of knowledge about the brain that I lack, but this certainly has been more fun than I anticipated it would be. A better crowd than I anticipated we'd have. We had a couple of very eminent people here in the audience. I won't name all of them because I don't think they all really want to be named, but we will do this kind of discussion a lot more. I just want to reiterate the whole point of this discussion was as part of the lead up to our Health and Wealth of Our Planet conference, which is September 20th at City Winery here in New York City, where we'll have a great discussion on business and sustainability. We also have a very important Techonomy 2022 conference with Maria Ressa, who would probably have entered into this discussion very interestingly, won the Nobel Peace Prize last year, and a bunch of other great speakers. That's November 13th through 15th. Of course, you're all invited to come to all these things. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Dan, for being a good sport of me being so cynical. Onward, but this video will also be posted after the fact, and I've asked Kendall to make sure she copies out the text chat, because there was some great stuff in the chat that I don't want to forget. I think we all probably could listen to this again and learn more, because there was a lot of density here. So thank you so much.
Bye all. Thank you.